The mystery of the Kraken, which I treated in a companion volume to the present, recently published, is not difficult to unravel. The clue to it is plain, and when properly taken up, it is as easily unwound to arrive at the truth as a cocoon of silk to get at the chrysalis within it. It was a boorish exaggeration, a legend born of ignorance, superstition, and wonder. But when such a skein of facts has passed through the hands of poets, it is sure to be found in a much more intricate tangle, and many a knot of pure invention may have to be cut before it is made clear. Nevertheless, we shall be able to discern that more than one of the most famous and hideous monsters of old classical lore originated, like the Kraken, from the author's knowledge of those strange creatures, the head-footed mollusks. There can be little doubt that the octopus was the model from which the old poets and artists formed their ideas and drew their pictures of the Lernaean Hydra, whose heads grew again when cut off by Hercules, and also of the monster Scylla, who, with 6 heads and 6 long writhing necks, snatched men off the decks of passing ships and devoured them in the recesses of her gloomy cavern. Of the Hydra, Diodorus relates that it had 100 heads, Simonides says 50, but the generally received opinion was that of Apollodorus, Hyginus, and others, that it had only 9. Apollodorus of Athens, son of Asclepiades, who wrote in stiff, quaint Greek around 120 BC, gives in his Bibliotheca the following account of the many-headed monster. This Hydra, he says, nourished in the marshes of Lerne, went forth into the open country and destroyed the herds of the land. It had a huge body and 9 heads, 8 mortal, but the 9th immortal. Having mounted his chariot, which was driven by Iolaus, Hercules got to Lerne and stopped his horses. Finding the Hydra on a certain raised ground near the source of the Amymon, where its lair was, he made it come out by pelting it with burning missiles. He seized and stopped it, but it twisted itself around one of his feet and struggled with him. He broke its head with his club, but that was useless, for when one head was broken, 2 sprang up. A huge crab helped the Hydra by biting the foot of Hercules. This he killed and called Iolaus, who, setting on fire part of the adjoining forest, burned the germs of the growing heads with torches and stopped their development. Having thus outmaneuvered the growing heads, he cut off the immortal head, buried it, and put a heavy stone upon it beside the road going from Lerne to Eleonta. Having opened the Hydra, he dipped his arrows in its gall. If we wish to find in nature the counterpart of this Hydra, we must seek, firstly, an animal with 8 outgrowths from its trunk, which it can develop afresh or replace with new ones if any or all of them are amputated or injured. We must also show that this animal, so strange in form and possessing such remarkable attributes, was well known in the locality where the legend was believed. We have it in the octopus, which abounded in the Mediterranean and Aegean seas, and whose 8 prehensile arms or tentacles spring from its central body, the immortal head, and which, if lost or mutilated by misadventure, are capable of reproduction. That a knowledge of the octopus existed at a very early period in man's history, we have abundant evidence. The ancient Egyptians depicted it among their hieroglyphics. An interesting proof that they were also acquainted with other cephalopods was given to me by the late Mr. E.W. Cook, R.A., while on a trip up the Nile in January 1875. He visited the temple of Ber-el-Bari, Thebes, dating to 1700 BC, the entrance of which had been deeply buried beneath the light, wind-drifted sand accumulated over many centuries. By order of the Khedive, access had just been obtained to its interior by the excavation and removal of this deep deposit. Among the hieroglyphics on the walls were found, between the zigzag lines representing water, figures of various fishes, copies of which Mr. Cook kindly gave me, which are so accurately portrayed as to be easily identified. With them was the outline of a squid, 14 inches long, a figure of which, from Mr. Cook's drawing, is here shown. As this temple is 500 miles from the Nile Delta, it is remarkable that nearly all the fishes represented are marine species. That the octopus was a familiar object to the ancient Greeks we know by the frequency with which its image is found on their coins, gems, and ornaments. Aldrovandus describes very ancient coins found at Syracuse and Tarentum bearing the figure of an octopus. He says the Syracusans had 2 coins, one of bronze, the other of gold, both of which had an octopus alone on one side. On the reverse of the bronze one was a veiled female face in profile, with the inscription ZYPA. I have one of these bronze Syracusan coins. It was kindly given to me some years ago by my friend Dr. John Miller, FLS. The octopus is really well depicted. On the gold coin, the female head was differently veiled, and at the back of the neck was a fish. The inscription on this coin was missing. Goldsius was of the opinion that the head was that of Arethusa. The coins found at Tarentum had on one side a figure of Neptune seated on a dolphin, holding an octopus in one hand and a trident in the other. Lern, or Lerna, the reputed home of the Hydra, was a port of southern Greece, situated at the head of the Gulf of Nauplia, between the existing towns of Argos and Tripolitza. Within a few miles of it was Mycenae, and it is remarkable that Dr. Schliemann, during his excavations there in 1876, found in a tomb a gold plate or button 2.5 inches in diameter, on which is figured an octopus, the 8 arms of which are converted into spirals, the head and 2 eyes being distinctly visible. In another sepulchre, he discovered 53 golden models of the octopus, all exactly alike and apparently cast in the same mold. The arms are very naturally carved. By the kindness of Mr. Murray, his publisher, I am enabled to give illustrations of these and 2 other handsome ornaments. Having ascertained that the octopus was a familiar object in the very locality where the combat between Hercules and the Hydra is supposed to have taken place, let us compare the animal as it exists with the monstrous offspring of Typhon and Echidna. It is not uncommon that when an octopus is caught, one or more of its arms are found to be shorter than the rest, showing signs of amputation and new growth from the old cicatrix. Several such specimens were brought to the Brighton Aquarium while I had charge of its natural history department. One of them was particularly interesting. 2 of its arms had evidently been bitten off about 4 inches from the base, and out from each healed stump, which, in proportion, would be as if a man's arm were amputated halfway between the shoulder and elbow, grew a slender new piece of arm, about as large as a lady's stiletto or a small button hook. In fact, just the equivalent of worthy Captain Cuttle's iron hook, which did duty for his lost hand. It was an illustrative example of the commencement of the repair and restoration of mutilated limbs. This mutilation is so common in some localities that Professor Steenstrup says that almost every octopus he examined had 1 or 2 arms reproduced, and that he had seen females in which all 8 arms had been lost but were more or less restored. He also mentions a male in which 7 arms had been thus replaced. He adds that while the Octopoda possessed the power of reproducing their arms with great facility and rapidity, arms which are exposed to many enemies, the Decapoda, the Sapida, and squids, appear to be incapable of thus repairing and replacing accidental injuries. This is entirely in accord with my own observations. This reparative power is also possessed by some other animals, the starfish and crustacea being the most familiar examples. In the case of the lobster or crab, however, the only joint from which new growth can start is that connected with the body, so if a limb is injured anywhere, the whole of it must be discarded. Therefore, the animal has the power of casting it off at will. The octopus, by contrast, is incapable of voluntary dismemberment but reproduces the lost portion of an injured arm as an outgrowth from the old stump. The ancients were well acquainted with this reparative faculty of the octopus. But of course, the simple fact was insufficient for an imaginative people, and they embellished it with fancies of their own. There lingers still among the fishermen of the Mediterranean a very old belief that the octopus, when pushed by hunger, will gnaw and devour portions of its own arms. Aristotle knew of this belief and positively contradicted it, but a fallacy, once planted, is hard to eradicate. You may cut it down and apparently destroy it root and branch, but its seeds are scattered abroad and spring up elsewhere even now. In many seaside towns, you'll find this belief living on in the tales of seasoned fishermen, passed from generation to generation as though it were proven fact. Yet modern science, through careful observation and study, has consistently demonstrated that the octopus does not cannibalize its own limbs by choice. Instead, when these appendages are found truncated or missing, it is often the result of conflict with predators or environmental hazards. The capacity for regeneration is not a sign of self-destruction, but of nature's resilience. In truth, the myths that surround the octopus, its monstrous depictions, its misunderstood behaviors, and its fantastical powers reflect more about the imagination of humankind than the animal itself. The ancients, struggling to interpret what they saw in the depths of the sea, often turned to allegory and embellishment. They transformed the octopus into the Hydra, the Scylla, the Kraken, creatures born of wonder and fear, shaped as much by ignorance as by inspiration. But now, armed with the tools of modern biology and the perspective of centuries, we can begin to separate the factual creature from its legendary shadow. What remains is no less marvelous, an intelligent, adaptable, and oddly graceful being whose reality is far more fascinating than any myth. Its regenerative limbs, ink-based defenses, and remarkable camouflage abilities elevate it beyond the simple category of sea monster and place it among the ocean's most remarkable inhabitants. As our understanding grows, so too does our respect for the octopus, not as a monster of lore, but as a marvel of evolution. The stories of the past, though beautiful in their own right, must now make room for the truth, which in its elegance and complexity tells a tale every bit as compelling.